I'm John Dervage with Our Revolution, Colorado Springs. With me today is Stephanie Vigil, who's running for Colorado House District 16. First off, thank you for being here. Again, doing this virtually because of the day and age that we're in. So first off, I just want to ask you, how are you doing? How are you doing in these pandemic times?
Oh, thank you for asking. I'm hunkered down like most people, and I'm actually just really fortunate. I don't have any loss of income or anything going on. My spouse is still collecting pay while he's not working, so I just feel pretty fortunate that we can afford to pay our bills and still eat, and the worst of it is feeling cooped up.
Awesome. So. Yeah, I think a lot of people are in that way. So, yeah, just to get started then, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for House District 16?
Yeah. So a few years ago, when the 2016 election cycle was really picking up steam, even before we knew the awful results, something occurred to me that really hadn't before, which is that despite most of the right-wing rhetoric around who loves America and who's patriotic and that sort of thing, which I had really internalized to be like, oh, I'm like a leftist who thinks a lot of things need to be fixed, so I must not really love this country. But I really do. And it hadn't occurred to me until I realized it was about to be kind of sledgehammered with this really nihilistic, not even nihilistic, not even the right word, just a total narcissist in our highest office. And so I thought, you know what? I'm finally getting to a place in my life where I feel like I can start giving back to systems that can be improved, that barely came through for me. And so I kind of just decided I was going to get political, started volunteering for campaigns, ran for some seats within the local Democratic Party at a precinct and district level. And so I've been organizing this district as a chairperson with the executive committee. And I wasn't necessarily planning on running for it this year, but it's an open seat now is what's happening. The Republican that's been in it is bumping over to run for the state Senate early. And so it just kind of seemed like, well, this is the time to make a run for it. I could flip it this cycle. If I don't flip it this cycle, I'll come back as many times as I have to. So, yeah, I just kind of took a lot of bad experiences from trying to survive on our social safety net after a very tumultuous childhood and early adult life. And I feel like it could be a lot less porous. It could be a solid, firm footing that everybody can build a good life on. And that's what other people deserve to be born into. So that's what I'm going to leave behind.
Yeah, and I think it's like a good message too, especially like, 2016 and beyond, and obviously even and clearly in the last month. I mean, like a lot of people, I mean, I don't blame them for, getting this idea of just like, well, like there's nothing I can do, like this just kind of defeatist sort of attitude, because like you do get, it is really easy to get, demotivated and not necessarily, be able to find a good solution to things. But a really good solution to things is, doing what you can to fix your situation and run for office, especially if you have the ability to and you have the desire to. I mean, that is how you implement changes, by running for office, or being a part of someone's campaign who speaks to your values and has a background that really relates more to the working classes of this country rather than the upper classes and the corporate classes of this country. So.
Yeah. Well, and working class people have kind of developed, I think, this mentality around our existence that it's totally separate from the political elites, and we shouldn't become one of them because they're very different from us. But it really, you can only hold back a deluge of ordinary working class people running for office for so long, even if you're somebody who really doesn't want to see that happen. So I think there's a certain element too of just normalizing the idea that poor people who drive DoorDash on the side for money should run for office and hold power. And people who have, lived on food stamps and Social Security should run for office and hold power. And wherever decisions like that are being made, all kinds of people should be represented in all walks of life. And so somebody's got to do it, and we're all somebody.
Yeah.
So
Perfect. It's a good, good saying. So, can you just explain then, kind of briefly, like a little bit about your platform, like, maybe some kind of key interests that, motivate you more than, to run for office?
yeah, my big passion topic for the state of Colorado is transportation more than anything. We are a state that's gone from kind of a rural western population to a booming population, especially along the Front Range, of course. And in so many respects, we're continuing to treat it like a chain of suburbs. And everyone's going to get in their little privately owned motor vehicle and drive to work and back and go to Walmart and back. And try not to like pick on an obvious choice there, but I think what we need to have in this state as soon as possible, and of course this would also put a lot of people to work, it would enable us to go green with our energy sources, is to have a fully integrated transit system up and down the Front Range that connects all of the rural highways and gives us a system that everybody can get where they need to go with or without a motor vehicle of their own. And until we have that, we're going to continue to have excessive traffic problems, an increased cost of living, more pollution, and it just holds people back to the lack of options in transit. And it's like not the sexiest topic in politics to talk about infrastructure, but it's something everybody needs to use every day. If you're driving your car and the road is full of potholes and the traffic is terrible because everybody has to have a car, there's no way to not be affected by it. We have to communally get to work on making it a fully integrated and functional system.
Yeah, and I mean, the infrastructure necessarily isn't like a sexy topic, but it is one of those topics that it seems like you can get pretty good consensus on between the parties because it does affect so many different things in different ways. I mean, you mentioned the environmental impact, incredibly positive. The economic impact, incredibly positive. The amount of jobs it creates economically, that's also economically positive. I have lived in a few places that have extremely good transportation, public transportation systems, like Minneapolis. They have a light rail system that goes from, Mall of America and the airport down south all the way up to, the suburbs north. I mean, it's widely used. It's extremely popular. And what it's actually done is it's boosted the economies of all of the areas around it because people utilize it, businesses grow around it, and there's just a dramatic increase of profit that can be generated by public transit systems. And I also think about the aspect too, like you mentioned, like who likes driving on 25? Like like that the road is just it's always in disrepair and there's always backup. Like if I could just take a train to Fort Collins to visit my brother, or a train to Denver to go shopping, I mean that'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah, and they keep wanting to do this. We'll add a lane in each direction, and then we'll add another lane in each direction, and I see you're chuckling at it. Like we've probably seen the same research on this. It really doesn't matter how many lanes you add; it just fill up with cars. They just fill up with cars, and by the time they're done with this current lane expansion, it's already not going to be enough. And I don't know what your familiarity is with our county government here, El Paso County's government, but our county commission passed through the funding for that without disclosing to the public that the new lane for the stretch that they were paying for was going to be a toll lane.
Yeah.
So they got the public approval on it, but they're like, hey, we're going to add a lane that's going to make the traffic better. Like, here's how much it's going to cost. And everyone's like, okay, we're always hesitant to approve tax increases in El Paso County. And then as soon as it was approved, they're like, great, you're cool with it being a toll lane, right? Wait, what? They can't even get it paid for without scamming people.
That's
at a certain
exactly
point,
why.
we just have
And
to.
that's so frustrating too, because that's exactly why people hate politicians, right? I mean, like that right there
Yeah.
is like why people like, oh, they never do anything for me, or like they only implement things that I mean that it's just like they go through these these games. It's just ridiculous. So that's why we need more working class people in positions of positions of government.
And I'll tell you, I am not a BSer. I know it's easy enough to say, but I'm honestly really bad at it. I just can't. I don't do well with the. Oh God, how do you say it? Just kind of like the political trickery. I just don't do well with it. So I kind of went into this agreeing with myself and my loved ones and everybody else who I already work with that my whole self is coming into this. Like you're going to get what you see. I know I'm going to get called a radical social justice warrior, bleeding heart, tree hugging liberal, and all this other stuff, and I'll take it all. That's kind of what I am and how I operate. And I know that once you're in a legislative body, you have to make some negotiations and tone down certain things, and I accept that that's part of it in advance. But yeah, I can't get behind this the trading and the wheeling and dealing with deceiving the public for those kinds of things.
Yeah, and then too often I think that's what happens. People just, like you don't trust people. No one trusts politicians, right? Like everyone always is like lawyers and politicians. I mean, a lot of times they're kind of the same. Lawyers are politicians, but regardless, like it's just there's not trust in our elected officials, which is incredibly sad. And it's like considering we're a democratic society, and we can choose who we elect and who we put into those positions. It's really unfortunate that's the case. So, and yeah, I mean, so any other aspect too, just going back to, the rail system is obviously like the environmental impact. And I'm curious about, I remember, I think hearing somewhere that Colorado is, ranks pretty lowly when it comes to like our emissions, generation, just in like our air quality, partly because of the amount of people and cars, but also because of our elevation. Has there been like any sort of like studies to show like how like much of a reduction of traffic there would be if we were to implement like a rail system that you know of?
Well, I don't know about necessarily the impact right here in Colorado, but most models, so here's the ideal model, most urban centers, is that if you can get to a transit system that runs about every 15 minutes and that runs from sunup to sundown, or, so until into the night, that doesn't stop at like 5 or 5:30, and that gives everybody access to at least one transit stop within about a 10 to 15 minute walk, then you get voluntary ridership. And if you can get voluntary ridership, then you can reduce the number of cars across the board. And so without getting into the math of like how many like pounds of carbon in the air is that, or tons of carbon in the air is that per year, that I don't know. But there is a threshold that you have to hit when it comes to public transit before it makes the kind of car reduction impact that you need it to have. And it's never just going to be like one more bus at a time or one more, one light rail that stops running at 6 o'clock in the evening or something. Yeah. So the big key is to get people to wrap their heads around the idea that we have to do a big investment that actually makes it usable for people who want to use it on purpose, not just because they have no choice.
Yeah.
So that's where we start to get car reduction. Otherwise, it's minimal ridership, and everybody who can drive absolutely will.
Yeah. So, and it's also probably part of a bigger conversation just to have like ways to combat climate change in general. Like using obviously like getting corporations to start to use alternate energy sources, closed Drake power plant, no more use of coal, and obviously trying to eliminate fracking in this country, and specifically in this state. Just talking to people,
fracking here is a whole other, it's such a mess. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, of talking to people, I mean, I know fracking, that was, something that was kind of controversial last major election cycle. Have you talked to people about it, or like kind of what's your stance when it comes to fracking in the state?
Yeah, so Colorado has an unusual arrangement too, in which we don't permit municipal governments to regulate, distance, or ban fracking in their own communities. Like even Texas permits. They have so much less because of it. And when they do, it's not as close to residential areas. And for whatever reason, we just don't have that. There have been a couple attempts to rework the law so that we can get back that local control, and we continue to flail in public opinion. Because Colorado has a very populist constitution, we put everything to a ballot vote. We allow groups of citizens to do, which is double-edged, right? On the one hand, a small group of citizens can get organized and do anything they want, and then what does that mean, right? Does that mean that they continue to protect the fracking industry, or does that mean they fight for clean energy? So I think the best thing that we can do at this point is, I don't want to say not to fight fracking, because we should, but to put a much stronger emphasis on replacing the energy source, so that continuing to blast the ground beneath our feet in a violent manner, trying to get the last dredges of natural gas out of the ground, that needs to just become unthinkable. And when we have a robust network of solar and wind power, and we can look at geothermal and other options, no one is going to want that. No one is going to want that in their community if it's not even providing good jobs anymore. It doesn't provide any energy, and we don't need it. And that's honestly, that's just sort of an ethic that I come at this with. But it's always better to add positives than to try to take away negatives forcibly.
Yeah,
You know?
that's probably a good strategy too. And I think, like, over the definitely last couple of decades, I mean, there's definitely been a dramatic reduction in the cost of renewables, to the point where a lot of them are actually becoming cheaper than, these, the oil industry and the gas industry, which is obviously a big beneficial. And I think that, part of the reason too, previous proposals may have failed, or at least have struggled, was the overall, like, economic impact, right? Like, oh, this is going to hurt Colorado jobs. This is going to hurt our workers and, our economy in Colorado. And I don't think maybe they implemented like a just transition, like, the Green New Deal kind of tries to highlight a lot more of, like, having a transition from old, unrenewable jobs to more renewable jobs, that can pay more, and potentially, offer more modern sort of incentives. So what are your thoughts on that sort of approach? Is that kind of like more of a, kind of a strategic approach you agree with?
Yeah. Well, part of it is, having a strong union presence in general is good for our labor force, right? And so if we're looking at union electrician jobs to build solar panels and wind turbines, then great. But if we're approaching this as we're going to close all of the fracking wells and just hope for the best with the energy deficit that we need to meet, and all those people will be laid off, and those are good union jobs. Well, it's terrible for working people, and then it also turns into a political backlash, because the Democratic Party is just starting to make up with organized labor, which we should be, and you really don't want to wreck that relationship by taking away a whole lot of union jobs if you can't replace them. So that's definitely a critical component of that, is replacing the work with quality jobs, so that you can back up off the non-renewable fossil industry. So the whole concept of the just transition is, I love that's become the buzzword. Like, right, that's the phrase you got to use. Like, if you're going to go, especially for like candidates who are looking for union endorsements, always a thing you got to say, right? But that's really just historical context for any big shift like this, right? Like, at some point, it stopped being a viable business to run a livery stable in the middle of the city. No one's taking a horse and buggy anywhere anymore. Everybody switched to cars, and that job is gone. A whole lot of blacksmiths were put out of work almost immediately when people stopped using that. What happened to them? Well, it's kind of hard to know. They didn't get to tell the story, because they weren't the ones left standing. So we have it within our power to kind of look at that negative space and go, well, what happened to these people? And how do we make sure that their job extinction in the present day doesn't become a disaster for a whole lot of families and a whole lot of poor communities? So we can always learn from that. The lessons are there. So.
Yeah. And so just moving on to kind of another topic too. I mean, we got to at least discuss a little bit about the the COVID crisis that's kind of going on with COVID-19. I think an aspect of this that's really sort of angered me more than anything is this idea too of how there's a record number of unemployment, right? There's so many people who are filing for unemployment, and what that means in our current medical world that we live in is it means they don't have insurance anymore. Last week there was 3.3 million people who filed for unemployment. That's 3.3 people who do not have a choice anymore for what their health care is. that being said, like, what are your thoughts on, like, our current, like, healthcare system in America today, and like what would be a system that you would like to see, or do you want to keep the current system, I guess?
Yeah, no, it's always, I always have to sigh because it, like, in a perfect world, right? We go full single payer, just expand and improve Medicare, put everybody on it, and have the private insurance companies pound sand and, like, go away forever. But other countries that have done that did it really early on, and, like, the wave of modern medicine where it got more expensive, and they realized this was going to be an issue. And we have lost so much time that now disentangling that power is ridiculously complicated. At a state level, of course, I can't do anything about, getting everyone on Medicare. I do support our initiative to develop a public option so that in Colorado, so that all Coloradans can opt into it. I plan to opt into it as soon as it's an option for myself and my spouse. And in the meantime, yeah, like the sooner we can get to a place where you don't have to go shop for insurance, unless you want some kind of supplementary plan. It just doesn't function well on the market, and it seems like such a no-brainer to me. And I'm not an expressly anti-capitalist person, by the way. I'm very much of the mindset that it's a good toolkit to have a market, to have that supply and demand ratchet. It can do a lot of good things, but it also misses a lot because it doesn't have humanity like we do. That's our job, to care whether people live or die, to care whether or not people can get their medication or whether they're housed. And, a free market system doesn't know what to do with sick people who don't have money. It just doesn't count them because it just follows the money. That's what it's designed to do. Is to operate on that demand.
That system does know what to do with those type of individuals. It's just not a humane way we should be operating for the most wealthiest country in this world. Right?
Yeah.
Putting those people
Yeah.
isn't that solution. It shouldn't be the solution, and that is the free market solution.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in order for supply to rush to meet demand, the demand side has to have money for it, and you can't budget for things like healthcare. That's the thing that always kills me. Like, I can budget for almost everything else. We live in a little, 1-bedroom apartment here that's very budget friendly. We drive older cars. I cook pretty cheap food. That's fine. You know what I mean? I have lots of leeway on those kinds of things. But we can't just decide that I don't need a surgery. We can't just decide that, an inhaler that my husband uses is too expensive, so we want to use the cheaper one. Like, no, he needs to breathe. And that's just the nature of medical care. You need what you need when you need it. So operating it on this very cutthroat, high-stakes environment where you don't really have a choice in your plan, your employer usually chooses it for you, and then we call that freedom. That really gets to me. Freedom is when you can just go to the doctor when you're sick and get it taken care of. That's what freedom looks like.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point too about, because I think, there's things that definitely can be done, at the state level versus the national level too. And I'm interested to know, there's maybe some research that I should do, but curious if you know of any examples of what other states have implemented as far as like their version of a public option, or if they've tried to, even from a state level, try to eliminate or reduce the amount of power that private insurance companies have.
Yeah, I know, like, in the 2018 election cycle, there was a lot of talk about, like, other Western blue states like California, Oregon, and Washington State exploring similar options, and possibly even looking at like an interstate agreement where if basically it's like 4 different states, them and then Colorado, if we were to basically agree to introduce a public option and use that as leverage against for-profit private insurance companies to lower their rates, then we can get everybody to agree to, like, lower the rates and expand coverage and make it, which has not come to fruition because I don't honestly know how their individual state constitutions work because everybody's is different. And in Colorado, so far, the best we've been able to do is to keep working on this public option, basically, that we can just opt into without means testing, which is important.
Yeah, without means testing, for sure. I mean, that was definitely a big problem, I think, with the holdups to these to like the stimulus package related to the COVID issues. Just
Yeah.
all these ideas of, oh, it has to be means test. It's like people are like, don't have any money, and they're like, their rent is due or their mortgage is due. Like, what do you mean means testing? Like, these people desperately need help. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that's just, again, goes back
Well,
to why
there's
people
a
want
lot
help.
there's a lot of good evidence to suggest that the excessive means testing for social programs costs us so much more money than it saves. On the actual spending end of it, it's a lot of paperwork and red tape and everything to figure out whether or not someone is desperate enough to be like legitimately needy, right?
Yeah.
When you can just make it an even across the board, anybody can get this if they would like to use it, and be done with it. It costs less per person to operate a single payer system than to have a combination of private for-profit interest plus public, plus things like TRICARE and that sort of. They just turn into such a mess with each other, such a cluster.
I mean, like, again, we're just looking at like news articles too, like things that are released, like, oh, you're unemployed. These are what you can do now that you don't have health insurance. And just like this laundry list of like things that you can do. It's so confusing. Like, it doesn't need to be. Like, it doesn't make sense. Again, like in the wealthiest country, where we should be prepared for these sort of things, and we definitely should have a better way of treating our populace. But we don't. So I think it's important to aim high and shoot for those sort of changes. So
yeah, well, there are healthcare service quality implications and all that too. I don't know if you've I know obviously we all want to limit how much awful news about COVID that we're reading, but we have a pretty serious hospital bed shortage in this country. Compared to other wealthier countries, like just the rate of available hospital beds per capita population. And it seems like, well, wait a minute, like we're doing it on like this maximum output model. Shouldn't there just be tons of beds available? But because so many of our almost all of our hospitals operate on a for-profit basis, they're businesses. They're just like, a table with empty, or, a restaurant with empty tables, right? Like, you don't want an empty table at a restaurant at 8 o'clock on a Saturday. You want all of them full. And so hospitals also kind of operate on this model of, we can't have too many empty hospital beds, or it means we're not making money on that space. And they usually have to apply for federal permission to build new hospital beds and add them to their facility so that they're never operating at less than 90% full. So then what happens when you have a sudden surge of sick people?
Yeah.
Not enough beds.
The hope is, I mean, again, scary times, don't want to get too negative, but like the hope is that this, in so many different ways, like between disparities in income and just access to healthcare, and there's so many things that this crisis sort of brings to the forefront, and the only thing that we can hope for is that we will learn from it, or at least people will vote for good candidates that can implement new changes, because a lot of that is being driven, like you said, for a for-profit system, a for-profit system that has high control, or large control over our political process, which is that's a recipe for disaster when it comes to the working class and the majority of people in this country. So and then just to end this, I just want to to end on a positive note. I just wanted to ask you, so in these times you're staying indoors, and what are you doing just to stay positive and stay busy in the pandemic days?
Well, I would encourage everyone who hears this, if you hear it while you're still in quarantine, by the way, not to pressure yourself to make the most of the time off. If you have time off, if you just need to lay low, lay low. That's quite all right. I'm having like a really weird thing that's happened where suddenly I want to exercise, which has never happened in my life. And so I've actually been going for jogs and hikes for this time, like on a semi-regular basis. And that's pretty, I guess if what I get out of this is that I finally start having a healthier lifestyle habits, like working out on a regular basis, I'll take that. I'll take that.
That's good. It's good. It seems like a good hobby too to keep up. Hopefully as we move on in the summer as well. That's honestly what me and my fiance have been doing as well. We've been doing we've been running
Yeah.
because we usually take our dog out for a walk, but instead of taking her out for a walk, we've taken her out for a run. So yeah, it's good for
Nice.
everyone. So awesome.
Nice. So you
Well,
have burned that energy. So.
exactly. Yeah, she's a like 2-year-old little corgi, so a lot of energy. Anyway, yeah, thank you for talking to us today, sitting down with us. Stay healthy, and hopefully we'll schedule future interviews in the few months, and hopefully even meet up in person. That'd be even more
I
ideal.
know.
So again, yeah,
All right.
thank you
Well,
so
thank you
much.
so much for your time and for the work y'all are doing in our community to amp up progressive candidates and causes. It's
Yeah,
definitely
no problem. Yeah, thank you so much for sitting down.
so.